Have you ever noticed when Bernie Sanders doesn't say anything for a long period of time, he has the face of somebody who's taken a massive dump in some abnormally large adult diaper? Well, put on your tinfoil hats because I want to believe that massive dump is real and it's called Bernie's economic policy. Oh, he's attacking Bernie Sanders again! Don't attack Bernie! The recent video I made on Bernie Sanders has gotten the saltiest reaction of all of my videos. Saltier than my anti-feminist videos. More autistic than my anti-Black Lives Matter videos. More vitriol and anger than my attacks on Islam, the religion of piss, or the many times I've shown pictures of the Prophet Muhammad. Bernie Sanders fans have had more of an autistic screeching response than all of these other demographics. But after all of their whining, impotent rage, the limp-wristed, flaccid, disgustingly invalid, knuckle-dragging, drooling retardation, the grand Bernie troll himself emerged from his slumber to dismantle my video, to wreck my arguments, to prove me wrong. And of course, he gave such a great argument that he didn't use a single fucking citation. Oh. If I had to listen to every second of TJ regurgitating his argument through his Cheeto breath and then respond to it, this video would be an hour fucking long. Because there's three things that are constant with The Amazing Atheist. One, he plays the victim all the fucking time. Oh, how dare Naked Ape insult me over Twitter? I insult everyone. Go fuck yourself. Two, he talks about things he doesn't know about and hides his stupidity behind factoids that make it appear that he knows what he's talking about when he really doesn't. And three, he takes fucking forever to get to the goddamn point. So I'm gonna skip around a lot.
For a single person to be at or below the poverty line, they have to make $11,770 a year or less. So someone who's making $15,000 a year is above the poverty line. But a person making that much has only $1,250 a month to live off of. Meanwhile, the average cost of rent on an apartment in America is $1,231 a month. Now, the cheapest city for rent in America is Wichita, Kansas, where the median rent is $623 a month, which is still half of our hypothetical, not impoverished person's monthly income. So the placement of this poverty line is questionable. If you can't afford to live anywhere, in my opinion, you're fucking poor.
The poverty line isn't really meant to accurately describe poverty for individuals for two reasons. Our entire welfare system and most of our political sympathies are built around families with children, and our society assumes that your parents or relatives actually love you. So if you're in poverty, you'll live with your family, which is why most credible sources I've seen don't use the individual poverty line. They use poverty calculated for a family of 3 or 4, which is $20,000, $420 for a family of 3, or $1,700 a month. And considering most places want you to have 2.5 times the income of rent, that means you could afford an apartment with a rent of $680 a month, which leads to the next question. Why the fuck does The Amazing Atheist seem to think that the average price of an apartment is the same as the price of all apartments? I mean, the average price of a home is $188,000. Does that mean if I can't afford that home, I'm homeless, according to The Amazing Atheist?
In 1968, when the minimum wage was about $11 an hour, when you adjust for inflation.
All of the sources that I've seen quoting this number have used the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers to calculate inflation, which is disingenuous at the least. That's why I used Pew Research as my source, which concludes the highest minimum wage we had when adjusted for inflation was actually $8.68. Considering the fact that the Congressional Budget Office uses the same number that I do, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that my number is a lot more accurate than the number on inequality.org.
Well, here's the reality. The average age of a person working a minimum wage job right now is 35 years old.
According to the Bureau of Labor, over half of people making the minimum wage are aged 25 or younger. Only 11% of employed teenagers are employed at or below the minimum wage, and only 2% of workers aged 25 and older are employed at or below the minimum wage. TJ is getting this number by calculating the average age, which is skewed heavily by a heavy outlier of people over the age of 60 years old working minimum wage jobs, which is why no credible economist uses the average age, because it doesn't accurately describe reality.
In 1979, 27% of minimum wage workers were teenagers. But by 2013, only 12% of minimum wage workers were teenagers.
This is a fact reported by the New York Times, no less, that comes from a blog hosted on the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which reports on low-wage earners, which is anyone who earns less than $10.10 an hour, not the minimum wage. Interestingly enough, the average age doesn't experience any ground-shaking change in this same time period. The only real change is the addition of a massive amount of people with some college education and double the amount of people with at least a bachelor's degree. So it looks like the entire change can be attributed to college dropouts and gender studies majors.
And 54% of all minimum wage workers work full-time. And an additional 32% work at least half-time, which is considered to be 20 to 34 hours a week. 34 hours a week is half-time. So who the fuck is working a 68-hour week?
An additional 32% work at least half-time, which is 20 to 34 hours a week. So who the fuck is working a 68-hour week? What the fuck are you even talking about? This doesn't make any goddamn sense. These two statements aren't related in any way at all. Can you give me a citation, please?
What will you learn? What will you learn? That your actions have consequences!
But for the majority of minimum wage workers, their employment represents half of their household annual income.
Well, it looks like TJ got this factoid from the same New York Times article as before, and it sourced this factoid from this article, which is not talking about workers working the minimum wage, but all workers who would be affected by raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. And here's a fact to elucidate how inaccurate and overblown TJ's moral indignation at this fact is. Let's go ahead and say this statistic is talking about the minimum wage, even though it isn't. If you have a two-member household that both work full-time at the minimum wage, your before-tax income for your entire household is $30,000 a year. If they were working at $10.10 an hour, their combined income would be $42,000 a year. In order to be in the top 1% of wage earners in the entire world, any individual's income needs to be a total of $34,000 annually. In fact, that's really close to what a $15 minimum wage would get you. These Bernie morons are so disgustingly spoiled and entitled that they think that in order to not be in poverty, you have to literally be in the top 1% of earners in the entire world. The numbers and statistics that the Amazing Atheist is throwing around are not facts. They're not argument. They're advocacy research that he is just unskeptically regurgitating. So put the big boy numbers back in the big boy box, TJ, and let me explain to you why you're wrong. Increasing the minimum wage will not help poverty, because the majority of people who are poor because they're unemployed. And the vast majority of people who are working the minimum wage are not poor. I'm going to help to illustrate this to TJ's audience using something so simple that even you can't fuck it up. Basic math. When the Congressional Budget Office studied the possible effect of raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, it concluded that 900,000 people would be moved out of poverty, and 500,000 people would lose their jobs. Let's assume that all of the people who lost their jobs are rich white teenagers, so none of those 500,000 people would be adding to the welfare rolls or increasing the poverty rate. According to the census, there are 50 million people who are poor using the supplemental measure. measure. That's 1.8% of people in poverty who will be lifted out of poverty. According to the census, 67% of people who are poor did not work during the past year, and 25% are underemployed, meaning they only work part-time or seasonal jobs. If the minimum wage is increased, these people will find it harder to get out of poverty, and they represent 91% of all people who are in poverty, or 40,950,000 people. Raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour in a best case scenario would help 900,000 people rise out of poverty at the direct expense of 40 million people. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the amount of a price increase for raising the minimum wage to $9 an hour is the same as raising the minimum wage from $4.25 an hour to $5.15 an hour. This would make sense since they're both a similar percentage of increase. For low-income families, that number was $84 a year, which in today's dollars is $127 a year. There are 47 million people in poverty, and considering the average family has 2.5 members, that's 18,800,000 families, which means that poor families would pay $2,387,600,000 more, and what amounts to a subtle consumption tax. Considering that the Congressional Budget Office estimated that their real income would increase on net by $1 billion, that's a pretty big fucking deal because 67% of low-wage earners are unemployed. So they wouldn't see a single fucking dollar of that income, but they still have to pay a little more than $1.5 billion a year in high prices. Only 22% of the 7.6 million workers who would be affected by this increase have an income below the poverty threshold, which means that the entirety of that $1 billion in extra revenue would be concentrated in the hands of 1,672,000 people, at the direct expense of the rest of the 45 million Americans in poverty. In fact, because people who work the minimum wage have almost an even distribution of family household income, the income from any wage hike would be distributed almost evenly across the entire economy, always at the direct expense of people in poverty. And TJ's answer to this quandary is to suddenly become a science denier.
For instance, it was last raised in 2009. And unemployment did go up afterwards, but this is almost certainly attributable to the market crash of 2008 and the ensuing Great Recession. And there are other examples of unemployment going up after raising the minimum wage. So it's not like there's not evidence that it makes it go down. There's not evidence that makes it go up. Raising the minimum wage seems to have little to no effect on unemployment one way or the other.
If only there was some field of study that you could draw from that could accurately account for all of these cyclical market variables to draw a conclusion on the effects of this policy. I don't know, like how the fucking Congressional Budget Office did. Even the studies that lend to your point the most, the studies that claim there is no change in unemployment due to raising the minimum wage, state clearly that the reason why there's no change in unemployment is because the entirety of the cost of raising wages was passed on to customers. So your glib remark about how Walmart will be fine after losing $5 billion of revenue is hilarious.
It would cost Walmart about $5 billion to raise their wages all the way up to $15 an hour. They've got tons of money to play with. I guarantee you Walmart will be fine.
Because that $5 billion of revenue will come out of the pockets of the unemployed poor. My name's Bernie Sanders, and I'm passing the cost of my economic policies on to you. But after TJ denies science, after TJ denies evidence, after TJ quotes facts from two different articles from Think Progress by the same author, both of which are factually incorrect, TJ only has one thing left: moral outrage.
These people are working, but they're making so little money that they have to rely on government programs to meet their basic needs. Now that's outrageous to me.
Oh my God, I'm so outraged! How dare they not pay me what I arbitrarily decide that I'm worth? This disgusting, virtue-signaling, moral grandstanding bullshit does nothing to take away from the truth that raising the minimum wage does not help poor people. But Bernie Sanders isn't about helping poor people. Bernie Sanders is about hating rich people. Bernie Sanders' policies aren't only wrong, they're harmful. They lie to people. They tell you that there's someone else to blame for your life problems while ignoring the real problem. The United States doesn't really have a poverty problem for the vast majority of people. We have a personal responsibility problem. There are only 3 things you need to do to join the middle class in the United States. Finish high school, find full-time employment, and wait until you're 21 to get married and have children. Of American adults who followed these 3 simple rules, only about 2% are in poverty, and nearly 75% have joined the middle class, defined as earning around $55,000 or more per year. This fact comes from the very well-known and well-regarded left-wing Brookings Institution. The reason people are in poverty isn't because rich people stole money from you. The reason people are in poverty is because of this.
Her fiancé, Gary Brown Sr., the man who fathered 10 of her 15 children, was arrested.
Somebody needs to pay for all my children and mine and Gary, all our suffering, all our pain. Somebody needs to be held accountable, and they need to pay.
The Amazing Atheist loves the financial transaction tax because he hates those dirty, greedy, hook-nosed computers and their high-frequency trading.
And that's who this affects. People who are, in my opinion, basically parasites.
He wants a final solution to the question of high-frequency trading, and he thinks that the financial tax is that solution, except that according to this study produced by the University of Bordeaux, the tax only slightly reduced high-frequency trading activities. However, it significantly affected market liquidity, it increased market volatility, and deteriorated market efficiency. And this study was only targeting the effect of a 0.01% tax that specifically targeted high-frequency trading. Here's a study done by a Swedish institution which concluded that the financial trade tax will not be paid by corporations, but that corporations will simply pass on their costs to their customers, employees, and shareholders. Yeah, fuck rich people. Fuck you, Dad, with your retirement plan and your 401k. Financial firms would likely pass the cost of an STT onto their clients, which include not only wealthy individuals and corporations, but also charities and pensions and mutual funds. Yeah, fuck you, charities. Fuck you, pension funds. And if you think the financial transaction tax would decrease volatility because it would hamper speculative investments, you're fucking wrong, because it would also decrease transactions that help to stabilize the market. These 2 studies show that a financial transaction tax actually increases volatility. This study by the European Central Bank showed that after Italy instituted a financial transaction tax, there was a reduction in liquidity, an increase in volatility as stocks became more expensive and their prices less stable. Fuck you, economy! Fuck you, Wall Street stability! Fuck you, stock market!
In 2011, there were 40 countries who had such taxes in effect, and these taxes generated $38 billion in revenue. So Sweden's failure is not something that's set in stone for anyone trying to do a financial transaction tax.
Well, why don't you give me a single fucking example of a nation where the financial transaction tax has been relatively successful? Italy's financial transaction tax only raised 159 million euros compared to its targeted 1 billion euros, which is a complete failure. France has failed to raise half of the projected 1.5 billion they expected to raise, which is also a relative failure. I mean, for fuck's sake, the United States also used to have a financial trade tax, but it was also abolished. New York State and New York City jointly had a tax on stock trades until 1981. The New York tax was the subject of a study by Bank of Canada economist Anna Pomeranitz and Rutgers University economist Professor Daniel Weaver. They found that the tax made stocks more volatile, depressed stock prices, widened big-ask spreads, and made capital more expensive for businesses. All the experts say it will cause harm. All the studies conclude that it has incredible negative side effects, and there are many public examples of it failing completely. But all my friends are doing it, and I want to do it too! You may not be an expert in this field, TJ, and frankly neither am I, but here's what a few experts have to say on this subject. Quite frankly, an FTT is a terrible idea. It would harm all investors, especially middle-income American workers saving for retirement. The fundamental problem with FTTs is that they are distortionary. For example, by driving down stock prices, they make raising capital more expensive for firms. In the long run, this lowers labor productivity and wage levels. The most troubling outcome of a financial transaction tax could be that consumers, mom-and-pop investors, pensioners, and end users, those actually using markets to hedge their legitimate business risk, wind up being victims of such a mindless, perhaps momentary lapse of reasoned policy.
And Bernie Sanders, by the way, was not naive about the possibility of his proposed speculation tax driving down the trading. The pages, they 404 now, but if you visited Bernie's website back in the day, you'd see that his proposal factored in as much as a 50% drop in speculation.
A 50% decrease in trading? Well, let's just take your word for it and ask this question. According to the Tax Policy Center, a financial transaction tax would raise around $50 billion in revenue. But according to the Tax Foundation, we receive around $100 billion a year in funds from capital gains tax. So if we cut trading by 50%, wouldn't that also cut income from capital gains by 50% and therefore cause a net income of $0 for this tax plan? Oh no! A tidal wave of reality is attacking my carefully constructed, unearned sense of moral superiority. Bernie, save me, please! Bernie, please! Nations, sovereign entities, and geographies that have instituted an FTT have lost trading revenue and jobs as their markets migrate to FTT-free zones. With less trading, there are correspondingly less, you guessed it, revenue. There are no magic revenue beans, which equates to no additional bucket o' cash. Ergo, no free college. If that weren't enough, jobs and economic activity related to trading were lost to other jurisdictions. The third tragic lesson for those in search of seemingly easy revenue hits: the trading won't be coming back. Gone, gone, the damage done. The circumstances described aren't pipe theory, but statements of fact. These are the lessons of Sweden, Switzerland, Japan, and Brazil. Higher transaction taxes increase the cost of capital, ultimately lowering investment. With a lower capital stock, output would trend downward, reducing government revenues and substantially offsetting the direct gain from the tax. In the long run, wages would fall and ordinary workers would end up bearing a significant share of the cost. More broadly, FTTs violate the general public finance principle that it is inefficient to tax intermediate factors of production, particularly ones that are highly mobile and fluid in their response. However, Italy's experience shows that while this sort of tax is effective at reducing trading volumes, it isn't very good at raising money. Free college. Free college. So my argument against free college is that it doesn't actually reduce the price of college, and it taxes successful people to subsidize unsuccessful people. It taxes successful people who didn't go to college and successful people who did go to college to subsidize unsuccessful people who went to college. And TJ's response is to just perform this vast and disgusting moral grandstanding exercise about how great colleges are, and honestly, I just find that fucking boring. Because the thing is, I don't think we have a problem in the United States with access to higher education. I think we have a problem in the United States with the cost of higher education, and throwing tax money at this problem, whether it's from a financial transaction tax, which is doomed to fail, or from income tax, is a fucking retarded answer. I personally think that the answer is charter schools, magnet schools, and vouchers, which will help reform public education so people with a high school degree can find a high-paying job without needing to go to college, which is one of the reasons I voted for Donald Trump, because he's actually providing a solution to the problem of education instead of just jacking himself off in front of the camera for 5 minutes to the sound of the Soviet anthem. Now let me be real with you for a moment, oh dear viewer. I don't hate the Amazing Atheist despite some of my negative opinions of him, and I don't think every Bernie supporter is a fucking retard. And TJ has a few legitimate points in how I disingenuously structured my video to be offensive and provocative provocative instead of being informative. But I do that because it's fun, and I like to think I mix information in with the offensive enough to get the audience to question their biases. But the truth is, the honest truth, TJ is not a skeptic. He's not rational. He doesn't make arguments using evidence. All he does is take whatever out-of-context, bland, vapid factoid he's read from whatever vaguely left-wing source he finds that sounds like it will appeal to his audience, and he regurgitates it in front of the camera, and then he stands on some soapbox and performs some disgusting moral grandstanding. Now, I'm not saying you should trust me as an objective source, because I am not objective, but at the very least I cite my sources and make arguments with evidence instead of sucking myself off on how morally righteous I am.
So why are you taking up for the controllers? You're not a controller. Why are you taking up for the owners of this country? You're not an owner. Why are you representing the best interest of the elites? Because I don't think you're a fucking elite. So why take their side? Do you think they're going to give you a fucking cookie or something?
Yeah, fuck rich people. Fuck evidence. Fuck arguments. Vote for Bernie Sanders.
Come on, George. All right.
Deported.